Now, while some Republicans have inched slightly closer toward criticizing Trump, the party on balance has remained largely silent. My next guest, however, has been anything but silent. Joining me now is former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. So you're a savvy political guy, having been elected as a Republican governor in a blue state. As we're looking toward a potential indictment in the efforts to overturn the election, do you think that could change the dynamics in the Republican primary? Because so far, none of these indictments or legal troubles have really hurt Trump, it seems.
Well, it hasn't hurt Trump the way that most people would imagine it should have hurt Trump. But it has impacted the dynamic of the Republican primary race. Look, the fact that nobody else can get any traction or attention because all we're talking about is Donald Trump's legal troubles. So while people haven't left Trump as quickly as I would have hoped, there are about half the people in the Republican primary who do not want Donald Trump. They just can't decide on which of the other 11 candidates they want to support because they aren't getting much oxygen or airtime.
Well, you've been not silent, and you've really been calling out former President Trump for his involvement in his efforts to overturn the election. You did tweet this week, though, quote, "We have two very unpopular potential nominees, and both of them potentially face very serious legal troubles." It sounds like with that tweet, but tweets don't give all the context, that you were drawing an equivalence there. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of clear it up. Are you comparing Trump's efforts to overturn the election with legal troubles or legal issues of Joe Biden?
Well, look, I've been very critical of Donald Trump from day one. And at the very beginning, when he was trying to put out the false lies about the stolen election, I was the first Republican in America to speak out against it. And I was very involved in the actual events of January 6th when I sent in the Maryland National Guard.
I know you were, and you were very outspoken. So that's why I wanted to ask you about that tweet to kind of clear up what you meant, because it sounds like equivalency there. Yeah,
well, the tweet came from an appearance on another network where they asked a question about it. And my answer was that we do have 70% of the people in America do not want Donald Trump or Joe Biden to be president. They're both historically low approval numbers, and they both are potentially facing legal troubles. That's all very true. But I wasn't trying to make a correlation on which troubles were more important than the other. Obviously, Trump's been indicted and probably will be indicted multiple more times than the current president has not. But he's certainly got some legal issues that he's certainly concerned about.
Well, I think on that note, though, I think we can all agree that there's a difference between not abiding by a subpoena and returning highly classified documents and voluntarily returning documents.
On the documents, it's very clear. But there are investigations going on all sorts of things involving the Biden family that are also a distraction from voters when we should be focused on who should be the next president.
Well, I want to move on because there's a lot to cover, but Hunter Biden is not in office. Yeah. He's not serving in government. So I think we can all agree, not equivalent.
Well, I agree with that.
So I wanted to ask you, because you've answered this a number of times, so bear with me, but would you categorically rule out voting for Donald Trump if he's the Republican nominee?
Yes. I've said that over and over and over again. Didn't vote for him in either of his other two elections either.
And given that you've said also that you don't think he'll be the nominee, are there candidates out there? You've also been critical of DeSantis. Are there candidates out there that you think could have a shot of taking him on? I
sure hope so. I mean, I'm a little frustrated at this point in time that, as I said a moment ago, nobody's really getting traction. So Trump is at 50% in most polls, and most of the other folks, and I think there are 12 candidates. 6 of them are my former colleagues as governors. I know most of the candidates running, and I think maybe 7 or 8 of them are really capable, good candidates, but they're not getting much attention. And I'm hoping that someone will rise up and become a candidate that I can get excited about and get behind, somebody that maybe has a more hopeful, positive message that can take the party in a different direction. But as we sit here today, I can't tell you who that is going to be.
Since you know them all well, and I know you're not endorsing someone right now, you're welcome to, though. Yeah. Who should get more attention? Who's being undervalued or underestimated in the
I think most of the field. Look, I think, of course, Donald Trump is getting all the attention. He is the elephant in the room. But DeSantis was getting wall-to-wall coverage, but it's mostly been about his campaign failing to launch or that it's heading in the wrong direction. There are a whole bunch of other folks that just are not getting anyone to pay attention, and they're strong. I mean, Tim Scott has got a great positive message. He's starting to come up. He's raised a lot of money, and he's doing I think he's now moved into third place in Iowa. Chris Christie came from nowhere to be in third place in New Hampshire.
You endorsed him in 2016, Chris Christie. Why not now?
Well, I'm just trying to wait and see how they perform. He's a very good friend, and I'm glad that he's out there kind of taking it to Donald Trump and speaking truth to power. But we've got to, see who's going to have the best chance of actually winning the election.
So you've said you aren't considering or pursuing a third-party run, but you also did put out, I noticed, many people did, a couple campaign-style videos. You've been out there quite publicly. If you were offered or asked to serve as a third-party nominee, are you open to that?
Well, look, I've been involved in this organization for a long time. 5 years ago, I started a group called An America United. Several years ago, I also agreed to be the honorary co-chair of No Labels with Joe Lieberman. I'm a big believer in bipartisan cooperation and reaching across the aisle to get things done. That's how I was successful in the bluest state in America. But this is far too off in the future, and we don't know what's going to happen. I've said if nobody wants the candidate A or candidate B, maybe there will be a candidate C. But right now I'm focused on getting the Republican Party on track and trying to nominate a good Republican that can do a better job and that can potentially win a race in November.
So an NBC poll did show that 44% of registered voters would consider voting for a third-party candidate. Those are the numbers that I have. That's not that uncommon, right? Because back in 2016, that number was 46%, even a slightly bit higher. Would you acknowledge that the appetite for a third-party candidate is not unique necessarily to this year?
No, I would totally disagree with that. I think
the polling suggests otherwise.
This is one poll you're citing, but there are dozens and dozens of polls that give you really clear facts. So 70% of the people in America do not want Biden or Trump. They don't want a rematch.
They don't. Well, hold on a second, because they don't want they don't want them to run. That does not mean they have a desire and appetite for a third-party candidate. So those are different questions.
Let me give you some more polls. So 59% of the people say they would, in multiple polls, one says 59, one says 64%, would consider a third-party alternative. And there's another poll that just came out this week that said, given the choice between Trump, Biden, and neither wins. So in my lifetime, we have never had a time ever even close to this. 49% are registered independent. That's up about 5 points from 20 years ago. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's more of an appetite for it than ever before in history.
Well, you can't beat something with nothing.
That's true.
Right? I think we all agree with that.
I agree with that.
So is there any polling you have that suggests that any of the third-party candidates mentioned, yourself, Joe Lieberman, others, could beat Donald Trump and Joe Biden? I
mean, the campaign hadn't been run yet, so you just don't know what it looks like. I know the only place we've been on the ballot together, I do pretty well. I finished my 8 years as governor with a 77% approval rating, highest in the country, and it was over 70 with Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Of course, I'm not well known across the country, but you got to run a race to see what it's going to look like. Right now, it's the people are pretty far ahead from where they ever have been before for voting for a third party.
Now, back in 2016, also when there was an appetite for a third-party candidate, there was a third-party candidate, and Jill Stein won more votes than the margin between Trump and Clinton, which may have made the difference, did make the difference in probably putting Trump over the edge. So how can you be so confident that, and how can No Labels be so confident that a third party won't elect Trump?
Well, you have more than you have a third-party candidate now, and the Green Party candidate is pulling about 4 or 5% completely away from Biden. So if you want to talk about a spoiler, they should focus in on Cornel West, or they should focus in on the people that are pulling 30% of the people away in a primary. No Labels has an idea that maybe if we get to this point where nobody in America wants the Republican or Democrat, they might run a ticket. We don't know who they are. And we don't know who they would pull from or whether it would be a Republican or a Democrat. But there are obviously issues and flaws, or we wouldn't have two candidates that so many people don't want to vote for.
Governor Hogan, thank you for joining me here this afternoon. I really appreciate you taking the time.